So yesterday could have gone a bit better. My team were happy with me, but I know that me personally, I didn't perform as well as I could. But the good thing is that I made mistakes yesterday. Hopefully, not going to make the same ones today. It's similar tricky conditions, so I should know what I'm doing today, but we'll see.
So heading into the first heat of the day, I'd had the 5 minutes of warm-up to head into this. I don't know if you can really call it warm-up on this day, because it was kind of wet and cold for a typical day in February in the UK. I was all wetsuited up. If you can see some guys ahead in what look like full body plastic bags, then yeah, that's kind of what keeps us dry and not freezing cold in these kind of races. It's what I was missing from my Buckmore races back in June, when I got so cold that I had to go home. I only live 10 minutes up the road from Buckmore, but I went home in an attempt to try and dry my suit with a hairdryer. Oh dear. Yeah, by the way, that doesn't work if you try that. So if you're going to go karting in the wet, get yourself a wetsuit and gloves and boots and stuff. So, starting the first heat from relatively towards the front, looks like we're in 6th place heading into this. And it's a fully wet race in the sense of fully wet track, so very tricky conditions out. And for me, given what had happened the previous day, it was a case of not spinning. So my first priority in this race was not bin it, basically. So trying to keep out of trouble. Just on the first lap, that was a close one, but managing to stay out of it and not get caught up with the other driver. So losing a fair few positions at the start because we had to go around the outside of him, but ultimately not getting caught up too badly. So we're down to 10th from 6th for the moment, down to 11th from 6th. So fair bit of work to do going forwards, or trying to go forwards anyway, and trying not to go on the paint. That would be beneficial for the rest of the race, having made that mistake a ton of times the previous day. So, not the greatest opening lap in the world, losing 6 positions, managing to gain 1 back by firing it round the outside there. Don't know if it's going to work. It did. Excellent. So, now a healthy gap to the guy in front, and yeah, we've got 5 positions to make up to try and get back to where we started. So, it's going to be a tricky race. So, about a lap later, managed to catch up to the back of the guys that were ahead. And people bunch together quite a lot in wet conditions. I know I've said it before, but there's a lot of different lines you can take in the wet, and obviously there's one quicker, but it's really hard to find that quickest wet line round any corner, and then let alone string that together for a whole lap. So you get a lot of bunching in places, especially when you're in the middle of the pack, which I'm kind of down towards the lower end of the middle of the pack, but I suppose that qualifies for the moment. So biding my time here because the 2 drivers ahead were getting relatively close and trying to overtake one another, so I figured I would just let that sort itself out and then try and get stuck in myself, trying to overtake one guy at a time without going too nuts, like that guy did. Yeah, so firing it down the inside of hairpin 2 at Buckmore in wet conditions, it doesn't work. I tried it the previous day, even when it was drier than this, and there is no grip there, so that was an ambitious move, and fair play to him for giving it a go, but yeah, it didn't work. As you could see, a little bit of a spin there. But the result for us, or for me rather, is I'm up to 9th, which is decent, so we're starting to get back to where we were. I was still 3 positions down on where I began the heat, but yeah, it's progress. And about half a lap later, I've caught up to the guy that was ahead of me there. Making good progress through the wet in terms of pace on a few of the other drivers. I don't know what the guys up front were doing because I am way down on all of them guys. However, managing to gain another position there just by getting better rotation in the midpoint of the corner compared to the guy ahead, so I was able to get on the gas earlier and fire it out without getting too much oversteer, which was good. And that's the position I held until pretty much the end of the race. I was really happy with how I drove this. Charlie, my teammate from the previous day, had come along to watch and gave me a bit of feedback after this race, which I talk about in a sec. But I was consistent, so I was happy with that at the very least, and I didn't stack it like that guy at hairpin 1 did. Unfortunately for him, last lap of the race, I mean, there's never a convenient time to spin, But if you've managed to get to the last lap and then you stack it, I feel like that's a bit more of a kick in the teeth than, I don't know, if you got it out of the way and done earlier in the race and then you can try and recover. But if you get a mistake that late in the race, then yeah, there's no chance you're going to come back from it. So started the race 6th, finishing 7th. That's decent as long as we hold it together in the next few corners anyways. Mostly staying off the paint in this heat. The paint is trouble. Like, I realised that the previous day in the endurance race. So yeah, just made sure that I raced a bit smarter on this one. And it's a decent way to start the day. Losing positions, not ultimately as good as we could have done, but in the context of how the previous day had gone, I was happy that I just drove consistently, to be honest with you. And it gave me a good feeling heading into the second heat.
So yeah, as you would have just seen, heat 1 was decent. I got a bit of feedback from Charlie, who was my teammate yesterday. He's come down to watch, and he reckoned that I can be a bit more aggressive going into the corners. For me, I was just trying to play it safe in that race and stay out of trouble, as you would have just seen. So maybe I'll get a bit more aggressive in this race, we'll see. But it's nice to have someone down watching how you're racing and thinking about how you can improve.
So on to heat 2. Starting mid-pack on this one, so it's a less comfortable position to be in, but the guy that we have ahead, or I have ahead, is Ed Bars. He's last year's lightweight champion in Club 100, so from that point of view, I was kind of hoping that he tends to make good progress up the field. I was thinking, well, if I can follow him through, be somewhat like a Max Verstappen in Monaco, where he was following whoever it was through the field, and all of those dreams got trashed right there. I'm glad the guy that spun was okay, and thankfully none of us collided with him heavily. At least I brushed him, but there was nothing bad that happened there. So again, not a very good start to the race. There's other drivers falling off there. We had a Class 1 driver spinning. I don't know if he got a tap, but the track's dried up a lot in the lower section of the lap, or in the second half of the lap. So at Buckmore, when it's been raining, the first corner just stays wet, like forever. It takes so long to dry, so you end up having to be really cautious around the first 2 corners, 3 corners of the lap, and then you can really go for it a bit later on in the lap. So coming up to Cafe Curve here, managed to make up a few positions over what I lost at the beginning, and considering we started 12th, we're now up into a positive position, which is great. So we're already up 1 position on where we started at the beginning of the race. Getting on the paint there though, not a grand idea, so I lost a position, and thankfully I was mentally switched on there, so that was a genuine driving mistake, not a lack of judgment. So I just took a sec there to think, okay, let's not do that again, and to be fair, I actually didn't do that again this race, so that was good. I quickly made back up a position there on the guy that we lost out to, which is nice. Way more speed than that fella through that corner there. Down towards Paddock, coming back up to Cafe, and we have some space ahead, which is good, with other drivers battling. So get the feeling that we're going to close up to the back of these guys relatively quickly. And this is just shy of a lap later. We're now onto the back, well, more or less the back of the group ahead. So we're going to try and find some overtaking opportunities coming up, and one opens itself up. Dan Healy just getting pushed out wide there onto a little bit of the wet part of the tarmac and just loses grip, and I sail through following, let's call him Mr. Smith in front of us. I'm afraid I don't know his full name, but Green Smith, let's go with that. So yeah, hairpin one's still a bit slippery on the inside, especially on the exit when you cross over where the dry line is, and it's kind of tricky to judge how much of a wet line you take to avoid the dry line, which is still slippery, versus when you just crack on. So through these S's here and down, I think it's called Simon Sweep, it's relatively dry now, so you can stay on the normal racing line, especially through this corner here. This corner here, Paddock, is for me the one that dries up most around Buckmore. I won't be talking with this much confidence at other circuits later this year because I don't know them as well as Buckmore, but I can safely say Paddock Corner dries up the quickest at Buckmore. So Dan Healy just sneaking through at Garda a few corners ago, and he's a good driver. He's a Class 1 driver. A lot of people respect him for being a quick guy. So again, it was nice to be battling with him, but at the same time I was thinking, well, if he's got pace, then I'll try and follow him and actually learn some things, because in my head at the moment, I'm still a Class 2 driver this season, and that small amount of segregation there still reminds me that yes, there's definite improvements I can make. Even if you're a Class 1 driver, you can still improve, but there's obvious room for improvement in my driving and racing. But managing to stay on the back of Dan Healy here, and this is when I was in the middle of this race day and I was thinking, you know what, actually I'm doing alright, which is a nice thought. It was a bit of a confidence bump, and with Charlie's advice still in my head, thinking, yeah, I can definitely be a bit more aggressive going into the corners. Well, I did just kind of go for it a bit more, let go of the thought of maybe I'll spin, and then progress is looking good. So making up couple 3 positions there, nearly getting Dan Healy actually. I noticed that we were side by side, he was on the paint, so I just made sure I gave him room to come back onto the circuit there. I think it would have been unfair if I just left him hung out to dry there because the grass was coming up. But we get a good run coming out of paddock curve, and then I managed to overtake him up in Scarza. I got a bit of a bump from him. I'm not sure if he saw me there, but ultimately managed to get through. Another driver running wide, Greensmith running wide on the exit there, onto the wet part of the circuit, and we're up to 6th. So starting 12th, ending up in 6th for the moment, and making progress on Bailey Morgan ahead, which is grand. So very pleased with how this race was going, and I was feeling really pumped right now. Now coming on to the final lap, we're still behind Bailey Morgan here, thinking that we might be able to challenge for 5th place. I have to admit, I didn't know what position it was, but ultimately I see driver, I overtake driver. That is the thinking sometimes. And we're pretty competitive against Bailey here. He's driving a good defensive race against me here, parking it on the inside there. Managed to get a bit of a run, but not quite enough, so I decided to tuck in behind. And then I ended up just getting a bit impatient through this corner, so he braked just in front of me when you didn't need to through that corner at that point. And through my impatience, I ran a bit wide going through the left, got on the wet, just lost some grip, and then unfortunately I let a couple of drivers back through, including Dan Healy and whoever the other guy is. So that was a little bit of an unfortunate end to the race. However, starting 12th, ending up 8th, so that's 4 positions gained. I don't know why I had to wait for the graphic there. Should be able to do that kind of math. 12 to 8. But yeah, so Heat 2 was positive in the sense of gaining positions and also feeling like I was genuinely competitive for the first time ever against a bunch of Class 1 drivers. And this positive thinking and energy, that really carried forwards with me through to Heat 3. So rolling on to Heat 3, and speaking of rolling, we had an extra rolling up lap, so it's a little bit unusual. You normally end up getting the field bunch quite close together, but for whatever reason we decided to get an extra rolling up lap here, which was done at a fairly reasonable pace compared to the first warming up lap, and I left a bit of a gap to the driver ahead just to cheekily back up the field behind me a little bit, because I knew this race was going to be a really good opportunity for me, starting in 3rd place. And with the track drying somewhat, managed to get a run up the inside going into the first corner, nearly challenging for 1st, and we're off to a good start. So for me now, it was just about trying to stay consistent, not worrying about who was behind me, but just driving my own line and trying to keep pace up. I went a little defensive into hairpin 2 just to fend off any challenge, but I wasn't seeing if anyone was behind me. It was just in case anyone was thinking about having a go. Considering it's lap 1, chances are you're probably being followed closely wherever you are in the field, unless you're in last, obviously. So moving through here, I know that I've got a Class 1 driver in front of me here, and a lot of the guys in this race that were up the front of the field were Class 1 drivers. So in my head, as much as I saw this race as an opportunity to finish fairly high up the grid, it was also in my head that there were a lot of Class 1 drivers competing. So realistically, I was thinking, well, if I lose some positions, so be it. Otherwise, if I can stay onto them and try and keep on pace with any Class 1 drivers that are ahead, then I can learn a bit about pace. So through that corner just there, taking a lot more curb than I had earlier in the race, and there was a decent amount of grip on there. Right, Getting mugged down the inside by Steve Brown, that's a fairly standard manoeuvre for him. Also a good overtaking opportunity for me previously. So we've now got 2 Class 1 drivers ahead. But noticing that I had a big slipstream coming off Steve here. Now, I don't know whether that was because my kart had more poke than his. I do feel like my kart had a good amount of straight line performance, but also the slipstream effect off Steve is relatively dramatic because he's pretty tall, and I'm definitely nowhere near as tall as him, so I was able to somewhat get within the Steve air body shape that he cuts through the air, and get a decent slipstream off that. So Steve getting through to first place there. We're still holding position in third, but I'm now quite close to the back of second place, which is good, and managing to stay on the back of him. So at this point here, I could see Steve somewhat clearing off into the distance, and I was thinking, well, you know what? I'm actually close behind Mr. Second Place. I'm going to try and overtake him, and then see if I can get onto the back of Steve. Now, an opportunity opens itself up nearly at the first hairpin, but just deciding to stay behind him. And then the door opens for the second hairpin, so I'd make a late lunge down the inside, and leave Mr. Second Place to drive around the outside. And I didn't force him out into the paint, but he just kind of, I don't know if it's politely let me through, but he gave me plenty of space, and then that leaves me with a nice gap in front to try and chase down Mr. Super GT. Now, I've skipped forwards pretty much most of the race here because there wasn't much happening in the sense of I maintained position, but what I did notice was I was gaining maybe a 10th or 2 tenths on Steve every lap consistently, and a lot of it was down to me getting a really good run out of Garda every single lap and then really gaining on Steve coming up the hill. I was getting a great slipstream effects off him. And this meant that when I looked back at the lap times, I was gaining about 3 tenths on him through the final sector every time, and I think that was just coming up the hill. So now on the penultimate lap, and Steve's noticed that I'm really close behind, so he's starting to get a bit defensive, and honestly, this was so cool. Not because it was Steve, but to be this close fighting for the win against a Class 1 driver, it was just absolutely epic. And one thing I did notice in difference of racecraft again for racing against Steve against other drivers that I've raced against before is it was really easy to anticipate where Steve was going to brake and turn in, and therefore I was able to stay really close to the back of him because he's such a consistent driver that I was able to stay that close. Now, getting a mad run on him up the hill and nearly overtaking him on the outside, but just getting cut off there, and I didn't get a very good run through the first couple of corners going into the first hairpin, so drop back a little bit. Steve's still defending ahead though, so it's giving us an opportunity to close back up a little bit, and this is the closest that I've been to him coming down to the second half of the lap. Again, slipstream, so really closing in on him here. Went in the middle of the track there just in case an opportunity opened itself up, but not quite. And at this point I was thinking, okay, well, do I need to roll out the throttle a little coming out up the hill? So I just rolled out the throttle a little bit and then nailed it right here just to see if I could get a run on him. And it was so close. Like, obviously I wasn't even alongside him, but in terms of time, I was literally bang on 0.1 of a second off winning, and it was such an insane buzz. Like, you'll hear my reaction about here. Yeah, I was shouting away there. I was so happy with how that race went, but like the buzz that I got from being properly competitive with the top boys for the first time ever racing in Club 100, I can't describe how like satisfying that felt. It was so awesome.
So heat 2 and heat 3 are done. Heat 2 was mostly decent. I managed to make some positions through the field, overtaking some Class 1 drivers, which is grand. That's not something that's happened before. Made a little bit of an error towards the end, just an error of judgment. I was getting a bit impatient behind the driver, and I thought, it's just here actually. So through that left, I thought if I went out a little bit wider before the entry, I could just get a slingshot through to an extent. But I put a tyre on the wet and just lost my grip and I lost 2 or 3 positions, but still finished well. I think I started 12th, finished 8th, I think. So that's a positive result. And then heat 3. Wow. Oh man, that was so fun. I've never had that kind of pace before. But I was catching. I nearly won. Man, it was so close. I've got to give it to Steve, Super GT. We've spoken before. I've got some tips off him. He's a lovely bloke, and God, man, he defends hard. It was so difficult to try and overtake. So, yeah, that was just cool battling out with him because, funnily enough, when I was doing the endurance yesterday, he passed me, and then within half a lap, he was just gone. So to be on pace with someone with his experience and the other Class 1 driver, it's just such a buzz. It's such a confidence boost as well. So I'm going to try and calm down a bit. I'm just walking over to the Buckmore clubhouse because I forgot to bring my clear visor to switch over to with a new helmet that I bought. So I need to go and borrow one of theirs. And I'm assuming I'm not in the C final. Otherwise, if I am, I'm not going to get back on time. But yeah, so going to try and calm down, think smart through the final, and hopefully I'll get a good result.
And the result of what happened in the heats was I managed to land myself at my first A final, which was awesome. Lining up on the grids in 18th, but heading up to the start of it, I have to be honest, in the dark at Buckmore, I got pretty confused as where I was supposed to be on the grid because I kept losing count of how many drivers back I was. And what I realised looking back at the video is I actually started down in 22nd place. So losing 4 positions before even crossing the line. So that's something I'm going to make sure I'm more vigilant of in the future. But here in my first A final, super exciting. Managing to make up a few positions around the outside. Trying to stay out of trouble, and unfortunately things got a bit leery at the first hairpin. I think a couple of guys in front of me made contacts, and then I just got caught up in the aftermath of it. But unfortunately, the guy in the green helmet just ahead of me, sorry, I don't know his name, I got stuck on his kart as he stalled and couldn't get it fired back up again. So we were down to stone dead last there with it all to do at the start of the A final. Under the floodlights of Buckmore Park, it doesn't really change anything in terms of racing on the circuit. Like, you can still see the same amount that you need to on the circuit, the same in terms of apexes and braking points. It doesn't really change anything there. Apparently, it just changes how well I can count from the front of the field to the back of the field. But never mind. Moving on to the end of lap 3, and the guy ahead of me and myself, we've managed to catch up to a few of the other guys running at the back of the field. He goes for an overtake, and I just thought, okay, cool, I'll follow him through because the space opened up nicely. So there was an easy overtake to make there. We're on a dry circuit here, just to confirm. Like, everything was bone dry by this point of the day. So lap times were down to low 46s. I think my fastest lap in this race was a 46.3. And that was much helped by later on in the race there was a good train of us running together, so getting like an octagonal slipstream is not the right term, but I mean like 8 people in a train worth of slipstream. So yeah, being good on pace with a lot of the other guys in the A final was again a good confidence boost, even though I was running down the back of the field, and I knew that at the moment, but managing to get a run on the guy on the inside of the second corner there, just getting better traction through the centre of the first 2 corners and making up another position, which is cool. And there was lots of heavy battling going on with the drivers ahead of me here. So actually, I have to say the pace of some of the guys in the A final was slow, but it's just because they were holding each other up so much. So they might have been quick drivers outright and good overtakers, but because they were jostling for positions so much like that, then they were making contacts and holding themselves up so much that I was able to nip by a couple of them in one corner there. So now up to 21st, which is more like it, let's say. To be honest with you, I was just happy to be in the A final here, so I hadn't knocked it on the head, but I was just thinking, whatever happens, happens, and I'm just going to enjoy the experience of finally getting in an A final. and then I spun. Unfortunately, I was late on the brakes. I think it was Chris Powell ahead of me there. But I realised that I was closing up to the back of him a bit quicker than I anticipated. So I just got on the brakes a little bit harder, unfortunately. Locked the rears as I was turning in and around the cart went. So thankfully though, because all the drivers were still battling ahead, it meant that I actually caught up in the space of about 1.5 laps. And I was right on the back of this guy already. Trying to take a wide line through to this corner to give myself a good run into hairpin 2. Space opens up, so I go for it. And there's another overtake made, which is great. Lots of close battling ahead still, so everyone's kind of, I wouldn't say making a nuisance, but just then no one's really helping themselves move further up the field and potentially getting anywhere near the leaders. I think it's worth saying that, as far as I know, the guys at the front of the pack were having a super close race of their own, but they were just absolutely miles ahead. So it'd be good to see the videos from Super GT and anyone else who was one of the Class 1 drivers battling for the win at the front of the pack. But down towards the back, it's all pretty busy still, and these couple of corners were unreal. So what happened here? We've got a driver on the inside, washes wide, there was another couple of guys that made contact, and I made up 6 places in one corner there. 6 places! It's completely ridiculous. I managed something similar at Rye House last year where some drivers made contacts, but that was in the wet, and I think that was like 10 drivers in the corner or something crazy. But the way that I managed it both times, and to be fair, I had this thought heading into both of those corners back in July at Rye House and here at Buckmore last week, was if there's trouble ahead, park it on the inside, and if anyone's going to kind of outbrake themselves or get into contact, they're all going to wash out wide, and hopefully you can just drive up the inside of them. And it totally worked. I was so happy about what happened in that moment. And then I realised why everyone had kind of been a bit slow. And it turns out, I think this is James Wattis. Oh, okay, that was a bit aggressive for me there, so that was a bit uncool. I'll take that one on the chin and say that was my fault. But James Wattis, he obviously had a bit of a slow cart on him, and he was driving such a heavily defensive race, and fair play to him. It was working out really well for him until we skipped forwards another lap, and the guy ahead of me just decides he's more or less had enough, sends one up the inside. There's a little bit of contact, and unfortunately that pushes James Wattis out wide, so I make up position on him there. But because he obviously had a bit of a slower kart than the rest of us, it's just one of those things in Club 100s. You get every engine's really solid, to be fair, but you do get some that have got maybe a very slight difference in performance. We're talking like, I don't know, a tenth or 2/10 of a second at most here, so it's nothing that's going to make or break your race. You can still get through a race and be competitive, I would argue with that. But it just opens up the space ahead, means that I'm able to drive on. The guy ahead of me just left me behind there, so it gives us a lot more space heading on for the rest of the race. And then I ended up having a pretty decent battle with James Martin here, so he just manages to pull a move down the inside of me right here. James Martin had done really well, actually. I don't think his heats had gone too well for him, but he won the B final and then came into the A final, has made his way up from, well, I guess it would have been 25th place up to what is now 18th for him. Guy had decent pace as well, so I wasn't too sad about him overtaking. At this point of the race, I'd lost a bit of ground to the guy. I think it might be Hussein Rashid, who's up ahead in the orange helmet. So again, following a couple of Class 1 drivers, it's nothing that I was sad about. I still felt I could be learning from them just by following them, even though I was relatively on pace. So managing to hold a steady gap to James Martin here, a bit better on the brakes at that point, but it's kind of toing and froing throughout the lap. I mean, you can argue track limits. You could argue that there's a bit of concertinaing going on anyways, but then James Martin manages to catch up quite considerably on Hussein Rashid over the next lap, while I've kind of dropped back a little bit in comparison. But something strange happens here. I don't know exactly what happens, but both of them were rather slow through this corner, and I have to admit, I didn't actually deliberately go for this overtake, but the space opened up and I had such an overspeed that I kind of had to just commit to the overtake, otherwise I worried a little bit about us making contacts, but we managed to get through. That would have been Garza corner at the bottom together. He tried to get me up the inside again, and it was tight but fair, which was great. And then, for whatever reason, I wasn't looking at the digiboard at the start-finish line, and because it was dark, I guess I judged this differently, but in my peripheral vision, I saw a black and white flashing signal on the digiboard, and I think I must have thought that that was the checkered flag, because I backed off there, thinking it was the end of the race, getting overtaken by 3 other drivers, and realising they're still driving flat out, and I made a boo-boo. So I'm still happy about how this race went, but that was a proper blonde moment, if you can call it that, at the end of the race there. So losing 3 positions on the final lap just because I actually thought the race was over. And now the race is done. So, funnily enough, if I said that I actually started in 22nd place, considering that's where I crossed the finish line at the beginning of the first lap, then I actually finished where I started. So, from that point of view, the A final went okay. I just wish I hadn't been a bit of a dingbat on the last lap and thought that I was done. But anyway, it was an awesome experience this day, and I couldn't be much happier with how it went, to be completely honest. Like, the third heat, I'm going to remember that feeling for a long time of knowing that I was actually properly on pace with some of the fastest guys in Club 100. It's a massive confidence boost. Just out of the car here, having a quick chat with James Martin. Such a gentleman. He came over to apologise for running into the back of me going across the start line, and I felt I had the duty to apologise back, because ultimately, if I hadn't backed off the throttle like no one would in the middle of a straight on a racing lap, he wouldn't have hit the back of me. But I really appreciate the fact that he felt that it was his fault. It was really nice of him to say, oh, sorry, I should have never run into the back of you there. So, end of a brilliant day. Really hoping for a similar experience at Bayford Meadows next time out in Club 100 Sprints in a few weeks. If you liked the video, subscribe. I will see you guys again soon.